Welcome back to Aiden, Making Businesses Smarter. I'm your host, Matt Slarchik, joined once again by Aiden founder and CEO, Quentin Fisher. In today's episode, we're diving into the powerful shift happening into AI, moving beyond basic automation towards AI-driven decision-making with this concept of the AI control tower. This is more than just a tool. The AI control tower is evolving into a strategic business partner, an engine for real-time decision intelligence that helps organizations operate with clarity, agility, and precision. So whether you're in healthcare, finance, manufacturing, this episode will challenge you to rethink the role of AI in your business, not as a back-end feature, but as a business strategist. So Quentin, let's start with the basics. What's the problem with classic automation and true AI driven decision making?
Yeah, I think automation is, of course, it's been around for a while, but the problem is it's been very limited and what we call brittle, right? The problem with automation historically is that it follows if this then that, if this then that. So you have to have rules for everything that you're doing. And when you have if you have to put all those rules in, there's a lot of stuff you just don't have rules for, right? So you can automate the high volume, low complexity stuff, but all the other stuff you do that really doesn't have hard rules, it's very hard to automate because there's no kind of real process. That's changing now because now you can put an LLM in the middle of it, a large language model, and it can actually be smart enough to kind of infer. You can set goals and objectives, and then it can then follow those broad objectives versus a very hard and fast, limited kind of rule that you need to code and will change or break and all that stuff. So it's much more robust. So you don't have to spend as much effort just programming everything. It's just a lot easier to kind of get done and can cover a bigger scope of things.
So if with classic automation, if you're changing systems and resources, that sounds like a large budget for IT to transfer things over to automate again versus LLMs. It's more agile and can learn with you with less of the effort.
Yeah, I think it's back to you not having to put in every single scenario, right? So you can have more general once again objectives and goals and have that kind of answer it, right? It becomes a little more probabilistic, what they say, instead of deterministic. So you might not always get exactly the same thing. So you have to balance that. But so I think that it's just a lot easier. You don't have, once again, you don't have to have so many rules to kind of write down every single thing that you need to do. And you can set these broad parameters and kind of guardrails that kind of you can operate within and then automate that. And that's where we're seeing a lot of the use cases for LLMs is really focusing in on productivity. And that's what the automation tried to do before. But once again, it was a little too cumbersome. And now with these more intelligent tools, which what they're calling intelligent automation, right? It's just a lot easier to kind of package those up with a clean process that's not overbearing and spend more time writing the process down and all the iterations and fixing it and all that stuff. Right now it's operates much better.
Okay. So it sounds like before AI was more focused on forecasting. Now with these new tools, we can actually show some real ROI on the productivity side. And we talk about this intelligent automation. Is that RPA, which is robotic process automation mixed with Gen AI? What is exactly intelligent automation?
Yeah. Well, RPA, that's robotic process automation, and that really came out of actually automating a lot of clicks on screens. So our RPA is really what it's doing is instead of building integration behind the scenes through APIs or other integration points that might be hard to do, the idea there was just to actually, it's almost like a macro, like an overgrown Excel macro that you would hit record on, and then you could click on these certain things on your screen, and it would follow that pattern, right? And that worked great, right? But the problem is that it's not really hitting the submit button, it's actually hitting the HTML code, a hook behind that submit button. So if anybody changes anything on the UI, right, it moves the button or something like that, all of a sudden that hook is no longer there and it'll break. So that's where they call RPAs being inherently brittle, because anytime that UI changes, your RPA process typically breaks. It's not hard to fix, but then you got to go back in and fix it. So it's a lot of overhead and maintenance. Now what's happening is there's this concept of these large action models, and they're not looking at the code behind that enter button. They're actually looking for a button that says enter, just like you or I would. They're using the Gen AI vision tool. So they say, that's an enter button. Let's just hit that. So therefore, it doesn't matter if they move the button or not, it can still say, that's the enter button. I'm just going to hit that. So it's much more robust. And that you're seeing a lot of tools and solutions come out right now. They're starting to incorporate this. So it's really kind of RPA in a lot of ways dead with these new tools. They're just, way better and lower overhead and maintenance to kind of run. So that makes them very kind of robust.
And for organizations that already have some form of automation with this new combination that you're talking about in Gen AI vision tools, what kind of value can this deliver to organizations that are already using these automation tools?
The existing RPA automation tools you're
The old,
talking about?
the
Yeah, well, I think what you'll find is those work great in some scenarios, but they'll be limited. It can't cover the full scopes. You can upgrade them to these kind of newer models. Lots of times you may have kind of a lot more intelligence, maybe a lot more nuance that you want incorporated that you haven't spent all that time with those if this then that rules, right? Because remember, everything else is very deterministic. You had to put in the very specific rules. Now you can have much more kind of more general objective driven goals established. So you can kind of really enhance that, and I think you'll find that you'll be able to accomplish more. So maybe before you could only do 50% of your processes with this RPA or 30%. Now you might be able to do 70 or 80%, right? So the capability is just much higher, and you'll find that the repeatability is better as well.
Okay. And, since the episode is talking about moving beyond automation, that's where AI is going. And we have this concept of the AI control tower. How does it differ from traditional business automation tools or intelligence tools or any other analytic platform?
Yeah, well, I think a lot of times we can talk a bit about horizontal versus kind of vertical AI. And a lot of these kind of tools, like ChatGPT, are very horizontal. They're basically a layer that you're applying, but they're not really connected inherently into any data underneath, right? And they're maybe not necessarily orchestrated by anything as well. So the concept of vertical AI is that you're kind of, pivoting that a bit, and you're really building that off of a proprietary data set that's yours. Data AI always starts with data, right? That data is yours. Nobody else has that. You can, of course, augment that with other data, but that's kind of your secret sauce, the fuel for your rocket ship, right? So you have that now as a capability, and then you have all these different tools inside of an AI control tower. You have a lot of the best tools in the world, but maybe you don't want the best tool because it's too slow and too expensive. You want to go with the cheaper, faster version, and that's okay for a couple different processes. So you have all these different capabilities. You might even have your own model that you've developed. Um, you mentioned forecasting before. LLMs don't do forecasting, but maybe that's a step in your process that you want to incorporate. So what you can do with a control tower is you can have a process at the top, and that can hit various different models. Maybe it's your custom forecasting model, but then it's also hitting one of the later, OpenAI O3 models, right? That's, very, very intelligent, but slow, right? Or maybe it's hitting something, very cheap and fast, like one of the mini models, right? And you can have a process then that's orchestrated using, through the control tower, it's triggered by something, so it's going automatically, it's going through, and then it's hitting these various models as it steps through its processes, but it's all sitting on top of your data, has access to all your data, and then execute. So that's really what they're talking about as far as, moving from, chat to kind of process to really kind of agentic flows. And agentic flows are really kind of outcome driven, and you have this whole entire AI stack that is driving, real automation and productivity.
And this is the vertical AI solution. So if I'm a business owner and we have data connected and we're working with you, we have the level two of this control tower, the LLMs, maybe a chat interface, Gen AI. So you're saying level three is where you can take all these models and all these operating systems that you have in level two and plug it into level three, where it can give you forecasting, it can give you decision making. What does that level three look like as the top
You
of the control tower?
Sure, sure. So level one's your data foundation, right? Level two is all your models, right? Maybe your custom models, maybe the best models in the world, maybe the cheapest. That's level the access to all these kind of AI models, right? And level three, that's really your process area. So people talk a lot about prompt prompt engineering. Well, this is more like prompt flow or flow engineering, where you're actually developing a process. And that process, that's what drives the automation, right? That's that top level. You define that process that can span, of course, many different systems because you're pulling in data from across all of your whole organization, right? So this process can be going across your whole organization, pulling data from different spots and, running different things. And they can be, be triggered by certain events. It could be running background jobs at night or doing whatever, analyzing things, maybe updating a database, maybe cleaning your data, whatever that kind of process is that you really don't have time to kind of get to or hate doing. That's kind of you want to move up the value curve, and you want to have these agents do the lower value activities.
I'm kind of curious, when a company's moving from proof of concept to production, I feel like some organizations might be nervous about control and governance, especially you working in healthcare and having these very HIPAA sensitive clients. How do we trust information that's coming out of the Gen AI?
Yeah, I think, responsible AI is a very, very big topic, right? That's probably a whole session or episode in itself. Um, but you first, need to understand, a how you're applying this, right? So as an example, we were doing some things where we were optimizing um, um, so what data you're incorporating into the solution. So we had developing models where we were trying to predict suicide, and you're absolutely throwing everything you can at that model to try and figure it out, right? And doing everything you can, right? And then another scenario where we're doing much more of an operational model where we're trying to figure out, like, what's the probability of this patient showing up or not. Well, you have to be careful there because you don't want to be putting protected classes in that model, because you just don't want any perceived issues coming out of that, right? So you have to kind of associate the data with the use case that you're really trying to think. And of course, the data's got to be accurate. So you need good controls on the data. Um, when you're developing these models, you have to make sure that you're accounting for bias. If you're developing certain models, lots of times in these models, you need to be um, uh, they're probabilistic, so they may not always get the same answer, right? So you can put some controls around the models, um, fairness and understanding, and a lot of times if you have people in there, you want to put limits on these models so that they don't get what we call jailbroken, or people trying to hack into them. so you can put block lists on these models so that they don't say certain things that they're not supposed to. So you can really kind of put some parameters kind of around all of these models, the data, all that stuff. And I think just in general, you're not going to get it right the first time. So you want to kind of, crawl, walk, run, right? And you're going to do a lot of testing. There's a whole approach called red teaming when you're kind of building these models and testing them. And just like the term ethical hackers is out there, like you're having when you're testing these models, you have like good actors and then you have the bad actor testing. You're trying to break it. So you kind of have a lot of kind of those capabilities, or you put a lot of effort into that to make sure that it not only gives you the results that you're expecting, but it's consistent, pretty consistent, and find out where it's not working. And I think with all that, there's a bunch of, you need to scale up your testing as well, because when you're, testing these models, once again, they're probabilistic. You may need to test it, 10 times, 100 times, right? To try and see how many times it fails. So there's ways to test these models at scale as well. And I think once all of that is done, you still, once again, crawl, walk, run, you still want to kind of be, putting it together. And if you can kind of have folks opt in initially, that's always a good thing. Like have the suggestion and have folks opted in. And then once you kind of work out some of the bugs, then maybe you can start having folks opt out, right? It becomes the default, and then folks can opt out of it. And then once you kind of even work out more of the bugs, you may have it as automated if you get to that stage. So those are just, there's a whole lot in that kind of area that you want to be careful of. And and you have to, of course, work with the team, and this is a very collaborative activity to make sure that it's getting the objectives and the desired results that you're going after as a group.
Yeah. So to your point, it's really about choosing the right AI partner, to this solution. It's not just choosing any kind of company, because there's so many steps you have to go through to validate this Gen AI and having, proper data. And to your point, it sounds like exactly the steps of putting controls on the data, checking for biases, and doing this ethical, hacking. The way I think about this is almost like you put this AI in different scenarios and see how it responds, and to make sure it responds the proper way. If you're putting it in a hostage situation, it's acting aggressively, and we
Mhm.
didn't save the hostage. You have to kind of go back to see the voice, tone, and how to communicate, prevent that from happening.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, I mean, this is very iterative, and I think that's one thing with machine learning and Gen AI, all this stuff. It was AI in general. It's very iterative, right? And there's a whole pattern out there. They call it uh, crisp DM. It's something that was developed for data mining, right? But the whole point is it's really understanding the business objectives. It's really about understanding the data, right? It's then kind of, building out the different models and testing them and deploying them and kind of doing this iteration. So there's it's a lot different than classical development, right? And this is why you'd want to definitely use an agile methodology versus something from a project management perspective called waterfall. You don't want to go left to right. You kind of want to develop these sprints and kind of go through them and test it and see the results and then iterate quickly. You're better off. I like to say it's always an 80-20 rule is very good. You're better off to kind of go through the process, with 20% of the effort to get 80% of the results, just to go end to end and then see where the big gaps are. And then you take another 80-20 on that, and then take another 80-20 on that. And by doing that, you're going to be very focused on the problem areas, right? So that's a very practical way of kind of getting to some of these kind of issues, and then that accompanied with very good testing, as we just talked about, right? You'll hit your objectives and protect yourself as well.
And this is why, with all this testing, why the AI control tower becomes this business partner and strategist for the company, not just a automation tool. And I'm kind of curious, do you have some use cases or some examples of how this AI control tower had a direct strategic impact on an organization?
Yeah, I mean, well, even before we go there, I mean, even back a big part of that AI control tower is the testing harness that you have as a part of it, right? So you can't just kind of put these models out there. You need to have a robust testing kind of harness that's in place, and then a kind of a process. Once again, just like you build these models, uh, things are changing all the time, right? So you need to continually update them. If you're building your own model, a machine learning model, you have to kind of retrain it every now and again. And in the world of Gen AI, you always need to test to make sure that that AI flow is hitting the results and that you have um, the consistency that you're looking for. So having that capability kind of built into your process is critical, right? And yeah, I mean, absolutely. So we've implemented this in a number of different customers. Yeah, even just from a classic forecasting, we've been able to accurately predict um, visit volumes. And by doing that, we've absolutely helped some large organizations save, 2 million bucks a year because they're able to understand how to allocate their staffing and their services to accommodate that business and avoid all these surcharges and fees, right? So that's an example of using kind of AI in a predictive area to kind of drive a lot of that. And then there's a lot of productivity improvement areas as well. We've been able to cut a lot of hours down just by using these tools and automating a lot of very expensive, drudgery work in doing that. So saving tons of time on that front. We're seeing a lot of kind of use cases, of course, with Gen AI move much more towards the productivity side than I'd say the insight and prediction side. That's just because this is such a new area. And for the first time, we can really, you know, text is we can now get insight and information out of this text, whereas before a human had to read it, right? So this is only a couple years old that these models have been decent at this. So now there's just this portfolio of use cases where people just don't want to do that drudgery, and there's all these high volume, high all this low hanging fruit, right? Just to automate a bunch of this stuff with these new tools, right? Whereas we've had the prediction and the machine learning stuff for a while, right? That's been there. It's kind of known, but there's this new opportunity, a new capability that just surfaced. So that's where we're kind of seeing a lot more of the use cases nowadays with all and of course the control tower supports that because it's not just about building a one-off solution. As we said, it's about testing it, validating it, making sure it's responsible, right? Making sure that it you know, gets better over time. It doesn't erode. And then back to your point, you have a partner that's helping you along this journey. Because I was talking to one friend of mine explaining it to him like, yes, there's the data piece and there's a lot to know about how to have good data, right? And then there's maintaining and managing the models and updating them and the testing of them. And then there's the whole processes and the flows and orchestrating that, kind of manage that. There is a lot of components in this stack. And that's where we really like to kind of provide that as a turnkey solution for you guys and really as a service to kind of work and partner with you because there's so many pieces as a part of this. But with that, you get a lot of value too, right? So you can actually, it's no longer an IT budget thing. It's actually, how do you get things done from a labor perspective that you just couldn't get done before? It's not an IT thing anymore. It's really a business capability thing. So you tons more capability but kind of a sophisticated stack, which is kind of why we work to really put all the pieces together in a nice bundle and offer it as a nice, easy service.
Yeah, to your point, Agent Systems doesn't just do the AI control tower, it's a bundle of different systems and processes and the challenges that businesses have. So you're mentioning if data is fragmented and there's EHRs, ERPs, and all this different legacy system. Aiden can come in and connect all that first before we can even get to AI. So I think there's a shift there. And I was going to ask you a question, but I kind of thought about this, the testing harness, everything that comes into place there. Are you able to create a AI agent that tests different AI models? Is that something that's possible, or is that
That's the only way to do it, right? That's a great question, because think about it. Sometimes when you're doing, forecasting and things like that, was it right? Was it wrong? You can know it's like a number, right? But when you're asking something to summarize a paragraph, and was that right or wrong? That's maybe not necessarily an easy thing to answer. So so what you end up doing is building what we call a golden record. And a golden record is basically, the question and what they call the true north answer. So that's like the ideal answer that you think of, right? And then what you have is, the answer that your solution developed. So you can't go through manually and check all these because you want to do this at scale. So then we develop another process, another large language model evaluates the answer that the model came up with that true north answer, right? And it compares it a couple different ways. It can look at kind of fairness, there's all these different categories on how to kind of evaluate that answer, and you can build your custom evaluation criteria as well, right? So you then have these LLMs evaluate maybe multiple, right, against all these different criteria that are important to you, right? So you basically you run your test, and then you actually then run these AI analyses on the AI to kind of then get a score, right, against each of these. And what that then tells you is where your process is strong or weak, right? And or where it's brittle or robust, right? Or tough, right? So you kind of have to look at this back, and then and hit these different a lot of different questions, but it takes some effort to build that true north, what that kind of right answer is. And once you kind of do that, yeah, we 100% use Gen AI to help us evaluate, the process.
it's fascinating how AI is kind of testing its own capabilities to see whether it works properly or not, to your point, the North Star. And I feel like with AI being so popular, anybody, I see a bunch of people on YouTube, anybody can build AI agentic workflows and kind of incorporate AI to your business in some capability, but not everybody can build a full AI system that's foolproof, that has this golden record of data and that can be tested time and time again to provide this accurate results and predictability. And last questions. I know it's a huge mindset shift from not just AI as automation, but as this strategic partner. What are some signs a company should look out for, or what are the signs that they know that they're ready for an AI control tower or AI system to come in?
Well, I think if you're just dealing with chat kind of experiences and you're comfortable with just using the available models with chat, I would say you're not ready, right? Get comfortable with it, spend some time with those, start using the various tools out there. Um, if you want to start using more of your data, and if you want things that are maybe are a little more specific to you, and if you want things to run maybe in a more automated fashion or run in the background, if you want to really, if it's a very important component and you want to test it out, that's when you need to start thinking about a control tower. And the way I look at it is, chatting's great, but it's incredibly inconsistent, right? These humans, right? They're very, very inconsistent, right? So, and there's a reason why we have processes in our organization. So what we're doing with the control tower is that we're AI enabling those processes. We're supercharging those processes. So we're running those processes through the control tower, right? We're making them more intelligent, more robust, and automatic, right? And that's the power of the control tower on your data, with the kind of specific models that are you know um, appropriate for the use case, right? And then running through your specific scenario and situation, right? And that's the definition of really of the control tower and vertical AI, right? Your process, the models that you've curated on top of your data and getting the results. And then, of course, continuously improving that as all these models get better and better. And that's the other thing too. This is not a static thing. As these models get better, hey, swap one out, swap another one in, but your process and your data stay the same, and you just take, just it just keeps on getting better and better as these kind of new and intelligent kind of components kind of get upgraded. And you just pull one out, and slot another one in.
So for anybody that's really excited about ChatGPT and doing some prompts, then that's awesome. You save some time on productivity, keep doing that. But if you're really ready to supercharge your business and not only yourself as an individual, but the whole organization and this vertical AI solution, that's when you reach out to us because there's so much more to incorporate and not only spend time doing prompt engineering, but really data analysis and looking at your data on a whole nother scale to really optimize your business for this upcoming era in AI. Any closing thoughts, Quinten?
That's great.
All right. Thank you so much. Take
How is this different from just using a chat? Yeah.
care.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Cool.
All right. Good
Awesome,
luck
man.
on